Matt the Piper. Good evening. How are you doing? WV Cigars. How you doing, everybody? A little midweek chat. Interesting that you should come on there, WV Cigars, because just about to fire one up. Fire in the hole! I've just finished on my way back from a photography job, and I tend to fire up a cigar quite often when I'm finishing up a photography job. You also need to have one. That's what I'm smoking, about to smoke. This is a what is it? It's a San Luis Rey Tesoros. That's a Spanish regional edition. I think it was released towards the end of 2016, and they really are smoking very, very well. It's got must be nearly 3, if not 3.5 years of age, and they're smoking really well. I've been smoking the what's the other one called? Also a Spanish regional from the end of 2017, I think. Also just coming into their own. Not quite there yet. Not smoking quite as well as these, but smokable. Hey Robert, how you doing? Hey Mr. Meyer. Good evening, Papa. So just finished a photography job and I'm on the way home, enjoying a cigar. I don't know if you guys caught my pipe number 71. It's on its third rendition now. I've played around with it again today. Um, I'm not sure if I actually improved it or not, but I've had mixed views from people about whether they liked it or not. Some people said I should have left it smooth, but you know, the thing is with smooth pipes is that when you sand them, you don't always see the sand spots that are actually there, the sand pits, the little black dots. And it's only after a bit of time when perhaps the briar's had a chance to warm up in your hands, or once it's been sort of covered with either stain or something else, that you start to see. It's unbelievable how the sand pits get pushed to the surface. And even more so when you smoke a pipe, although I hadn't smoked that one. But when you get a brand new pipe, a smooth pipe, which looks beautiful, virgin clean, smoke it for a couple of weeks, and you'll be amazed at how many spots start to appear on the surface. Somehow the sand, little sand specks get pushed to the surface of the pipe as it warms up, which can be quite frustrating if you've paid a lot of money for a clean, smooth pipe, which then ends up being not so smooth. Hey Jeff, how you doing? How's your? I see you've got some videos up on your cigar smoking. I haven't actually watched the Robusta one, but I'll get around to it at some point. I'm smoking a Robusto-sized cigar right now, actually. San Luis Rey Tesoros, which is a 50 or a 52 ring gauge. It's a touch under 5 inches, so maybe not strictly speaking a Robusto, but it's up there. It's around that kind of size. Jeff, if you had to choose a Cuban cigar, what would you say is your favorite Cuban cigar so far? So I do see that you managed to get some Cubans. Hey, Latakia Hunter, how you doing? Thanks for joining. Bolivar Royal Corona. Is that the LCDH, the La Casa del Habano? When you say Royal, sometimes the La Casas have the title Royal, like the A. Chapman Royal Robusto is one of my favorite cigars, but I don't have any at the moment. It's a bit bigger than the Connoisseur number one. It's more similar kind of size to the Connoisseur A, but a bit smaller than that. I'm not sure if I've smoked the LCDH Bolivar. I do like the Bolivar uh, Bellicoso Fino. That's a nice cigar. The regular Coronas, they can be quite punchy, quite strong, quite full on. The Bellicoso Fino, I find, there's a bit of a lighter blend than the rest of the Bolivar lineup. Hey, Paul, how you doing? Have you tried, Jeff? Have you tried the H. Upmann Royal Robusto? Perhaps I'll give the Bolivar one a try if it's available, if I can get hold of it. The La Casa del Habano lineup, they tend to be around the 52, 54 ring gauge by about 5.5, 6 inches, and they generally seem to be pretty good smokes. So I should really try them out in the other brands as well. I think a different one that I've had, the LCDH, is the Inmensos. I think that's a La Gloria Cubana, which was a very rare cigar. I think it was from 2012, possibly. A big sort of. It was like the same kind of size, even bigger than the Partagas Salomon. A big cigar, a big perfecto, tapered at both ends. And I had a box of 10. I didn't touch them because once you open a box, you just smoke them through. And I think I've got one cigar left now. Overall, Jeff, would you say that you prefer Cubans or non-Cubans? Assuming you'd have easy access to Cubans. Yeah, you do have to dedicate time to those. They're a good smoke, though. Very, very tasty. Interestingly enough, before I got hold of that box of 10, I got a couple of singles from a website here in the UK. I smoked the first one and I didn't enjoy it. I paid quite a bit of money for it as well. What I thought at the time was a lot of money. Well, it was a lot of money. But because I'd been trying to get hold of it and it was scarce, I paid it and I regretted it. But when I got the box, it tasted completely different. It's unbelievable how different cigars from different boxes can taste, even cigars in the same box. Well, Paul. The Maduros, the Cohiba Maduros are not really my thing. I've never really had a good experience with them personally, just my taste, I guess. Romeo Julieta Churchill, that's a classic. That's a classic Vitola. Hi, Tree. Put it this way, if money was no object, I would definitely buy some Cohiba Robustos. I do like a Coro. I haven't had one in ages. Probably a year or two now. The thing is that when you go to a B&M, when you go to a cigar sort of lounge, the cigars that you're going to find generally are going to be 12 to 24 months old. And with Cohibas, most of the time it's just not enough. Hey, Steve. With some cigars it is enough, but I find that with Cohibas it's just not enough. The White Churchill, yeah, VW, I agree. Um, to me, that's my favorite Romeo Giulietta as well. I've had some amazing boxes of the White Churchills. There was a time when I bought quite a few boxes, 10 boxes. A lot of the time I buy the 10s. It gives me more options to buy a variety. And, I don't have to shell out for 25 cigars at a go. And I was fortunate enough to get a few boxes. I think it was from 2013. So they had it at the time when I got them was a couple of years back. So they had 3 or 4 years on them. And they had this beautiful red wrapper, really very similar to the Royal Robustos from H. Upmann. They come with this really ruddy kind of colored wrapper, and they had such a floral essence to them. They were pretty amazing. I smoked through those pretty quickly as well. I'd love to get my hands on some more of those. The white Churchills that I've had since have never been as good. How are you doing, Tim? Hey, John. Monte Cristo number two, another classic there, Jeff. You guys may remember early on in my smoking career, going back 4 years, maybe 3.5 years ago when I started my channel, um, I used to smoke cigars on my morning drive, and which I do very rarely nowadays, very rarely indeed. But I used to smoke the Petit Number Two, a great cigar. If you get, again, like with all Cubans, you have to get a decent box. But the Petit Number Two, Jeff, I don't know if you've had those. The difference between the regular number two and the Petit Number Two for me is that essentially you're getting the final 2/3 straight away with a Petit Number Two. With a regular number two, you're having, like with most Cuban cigars, it's a game of 3/3. So you knock off the first third and you get the Petit Number Two. So you're straight into some sort of real medium plus, moving on to fullness on the Petit Number Two, and good smoke that is. That's how I experienced it, Jeff. I don't know that for a fact. That's just the way I felt about it at the time. I smoked a lot of the regular number twos and a truckload of the Petit Number Twos, and that's how it seemed to me. And when you're going for a drive, my drives in the morning average about half an hour. It was perfect because you don't want to waste the first 10 minutes or so on very mild. Well, I suppose in the morning with a coffee, it is. The first third is great as well. A lot of the time, what I used to do is have a cigar saver, one of those metal tubes, and I would smoke the first half on the way there and the second half on the way back, and works fine. North Country Fisher, how you doing? David Hayburn. Best 9 mil filter. I suppose you could ask a room full of people and they'll all give you a different name. Like with everything, what's the best tobacco? What's the best pipe? What's the best cigar? Um, Personally, I smoke the Dr. Pearl Juniors, the Vaughan ones, the red boxes, and they treat me very well. Some people like the ones with the double-ended ceramic, the ones with the ceramic at both ends. The Dr. Pearl ones have plastic at one end, ceramic at the other end. Some people like the plastic at one end because you know which way it's supposed to go in, and some people because the plastic goes in towards the to your mouth. And some people say they don't like that because they always forget which way it's supposed to go. So they prefer the double-ended meerschaum ones or ceramic ones. Oh, nice, Jeff. That's a good way to keep you company. A nice cigar. The difference between the regular Monte Cristos and the open is that they're a bit milder. They're kind of less of an intense smoke. And I think the concept behind it was for it was kind of a marketing thing for golfers, for golf people who smoke on the green. Supposedly, it was an easier smoke, not a smoke that you didn't have to concentrate on too much while you're concentrating on your game. Um, but I don't. I think it's marketing more than anything else. But they are a bit milder. Excuse me. Not as full, not as rich as the regular line. Yeah, Bolsa, absolutely. If it works for you, John, absolutely. Yeah, Tim, I would agree with you on that with the filters. I've really not really experienced any difference. I just tend to stick with something. I'm a man of habit. Um, I buy mine from GQ Tobaccos. He had the Good Friday offer. He had a few quid off the boxes of 180. So I bought a couple of boxes. I tend to get through the boxes quite quickly because I change my filter every single smoke. So picked up a couple of boxes will keep me going for a while. Right now, Jeff, I'm headed home. I should be home in about 10 minutes. All being well. Tim, I noted your comment about the pipe that I changed, that I rusticated, pipe number 71. I think there's quite a lot of people in your camp. Quite a lot of people preferred it smooth, and quite a lot of people, well, some people preferred it rusticated, but I think the majority wanted it to have stayed smooth. But as I said before, quite a few little sandpits came to the surface afterwards, and it just became a little bit too many sandpits. So I decided to rusticate the bowl. You know what they say about London? There's a camera every couple of meters, and it's really true a lot of the time. I got flashed a bit earlier on. I hope I don't get a ticket. Hi, Grosvenor. Yeah, I guess so. That's pretty much what I did. I just wasn't liking the look of it ultimately, and I'm not sure that I've finished up with the absolute best sort of version that it could be. It's quite a big pipe. I could tweak it further. I could make it smaller. I could make the shank smaller and then make the main bowl smaller. So the same kind of pipe, but just smaller. But I think, whenever you tweak and you tweak and you mess and you fiddle, you run the risk of ruining it. So I'll probably leave it. The only thing I might change is is experiment with the staining and things like that. But the actual shaping, I think I'm going to leave now. Yeah, Jeff, I've had my fair share of flashes, but this one, I was only just going over. I was just accelerating away from the lights, and I was a little bit over on the speed. I'm hoping they'll let me off. If not, I'm in trouble. You would say that, Tim, with a flipping great big hammer that you have got from that Mark Tinsky pipe. You're getting into your big pipes, Tim. Yeah, North Country. Sometimes it is difficult. It is a test of your will to just hold back. I'm not sure I would call myself a perfectionist, but it is difficult to hold yourself back sometimes. You just want to try to improve things. The truth of the matter is, at this stage of my game, I can afford to do that. If I wreck a pipe, I wreck a pipe. You know, it's not the end of the world. But the experimentation is a worthwhile exercise. The interesting thing is that you learn something new almost every pipe. Just on that pipe alone, I learnt. See, when you're carving a pipe, to get the balance of the pipe, the shape of the pipe is the challenge. And you want it to, when you're, there's obviously the shank and the bowl, and you've got to try and make sure that the shank, when you're carving it and when you're sanding it, is in the center and looks balanced when you turn it from all sides. And oftentimes it'll be slightly off, and even pipes that I buy in expensive pipes, they'll also be slightly off sometimes, but it's absolutely fine. It's a piece of wood and it's handmade. Sometimes you can't expect absolute perfection. But just today on that, not today, yesterday, when I was sanding that pipe, I learnt a process on carving a pipe, it's just an order of doing things, which I hadn't sort of realized up to now. And I felt that it gave me a better balance of the pipe when I was sanding it, because there's always a little bit more meat on one side than the other, and getting the exact balance is really quite hard sometimes, and only experience gives you that. But I learned a process yesterday as I was sanding it, which I think makes it easier to make sure that the pipe is balanced. Hey, Cal Delta, how you doing? I'm doing well, thank you very much, Cal Delta. Just on the way back from a job, and I think I'll sit in the car for a bit more and chat with you guys before I go in. Assuming I can find somewhere to park. All the best, Jeff. Thanks very much. All right, we're in. and I can relax. You bought any cigars recently, Tim? Actually, Tim, I was thinking of you this morning. There was a talk on the radio this morning about, actually, it was this evening on the way to the job. They were talking about this free internet, Labour promising free internet for the whole country. Have you heard about that? Hi, Snoopy. Have you heard about that, Tim? Nice little cigar. Saint Louis Rey Tesoros, Spanish Regional Edition. Very tasty. I think it's such a stupid idea. I mean, the concept is a nice idea, especially in your position. I would think it's an amazing idea, but in reality, I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, what are they thinking, that they're going to just make, some huge companies in the country just go bankrupt overnight? I mean, that's just crazy. Unless they were talking about paying those companies to provide internet to every house, but it didn't sound like it. They had a guy who called in. They had the Labour MP on tonight on the radio, and LBC have been doing this series in the evenings where they get an MP from each party, and tonight was Labour, in the run up to the election. And so this guy calls up and he says about 15 years ago, him and his partner started up an internet provider company, invested millions in hardware and software. They employ 17 people, give them a good wage, give them good tax breaks and holidays and all of that kind of thing. They're good employers. And this legislation, if it were to ever come to fruition, would put them all out of business. He says, what do you expect us to do? Make us bankrupt overnight, then what? What are we supposed to do? Absolutely, Chad. I got news for you, Chad. It won't be a lot different to what it is now. They already control it all. If they want to access your data, they'll access it. You know that well enough. Which other countries have free internet? Yeah, I mean, that's what he was trying to say. The guy was saying, this Labour MP was saying, the reason why Labour wants to change it is because he says that 10%. I mean, what really frustrates me and what really actually annoys me is how politicians talk. And unless you know your stuff yourself, people will believe what they're told. How you doing, Mel? Good to have you on board. And he was saying that 90% of, no, what was it? Something like only 10% of the country has fast broadband, and there's about 20% of the country that has no broadband at all. And the guy corrected him, and he said that 90% of the country has broadband, just doesn't have the fiber optics going into your house. But they all have high speed. Well, 80 to 90% have high speed broadband and access to it. So if you were to believe the politician who says that there's only 10% of the country has fast broadband, without him clarifying what he means by that, that's crazy. Yeah, it's exactly the countries that he mentioned, Tim: Japan, South Korea, and so on. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if it is actually free or not. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, it's not free. It's being paid for somehow. It's going to be defrayed via taxes, obviously, like anything else, I suppose. Over a pipe. All good. Thank you very much. How are you? How you doing, PA Piper? There was another interesting, quite funny item on the radio this morning. Perhaps, Tim, you can give the full gist of the story. I only heard a bit of it. Um, Apparently, there was a complaint made to the BBC because the BBC had run a clip. I don't know if it was in one of their promotions of the upcoming programs on for Christmas or so on, or if it was during a program. I'm not sure, but there was apparently a clip, a cartoon clip of a turkey running around with a T-shirt saying, "I love vegans." So apparently there was a complaint saying that the BBC was promoting veganism. I actually recorded a video this morning on my drive, but I never actually uploaded it. I just wasn't happy with it. And that was one of the stories that I spoke about. And I was just talking about how people are so trigger happy. You know, they're just so ready to pounce and be triggered by anything trivial. And these people must be so wound up like a coiled spring, literally waiting for the slightest thing to have a whine about. And, I don't know anybody that's going to be turned vegan by seeing a cartoon of a turkey with a T-shirt on it. If somebody's going to have a turkey at Christmas or Thanksgiving, that ain't going to turn them, that's for sure. It really just does feel like that people are just waiting for the next thing to be triggered on. It's a bit ridiculous, really. I think the silly thing about it is the fact that the news thought it was newsworthy, that the radio presenter thought it was newsworthy. And I suppose that's possibly part of the reason why I didn't publish the video this morning, because I would have been doing the same, making it an item worth talking about. It was a bit ironic, really. And I guess I was triggered by the fact that it was mentioned. So there you go. I don't know what SJW means. Can anybody help me out? SJW? Right. Okay. Social justice warrior. Got you. Yeah, I think it's all gone out of hand with everything. There was an item on the news this morning as well about. I really that was probably the main reason why I didn't publish it, was because it's a topic I've spoken about far too many times. Was about there was a discussion about whether um, a patient in a surgery who was having an intimate examination, whether a woman, whether she had the right to be told if her doctor, a male doctor, was actually a transgender woman, especially a patient who had been a victim of some form of trauma by the hands of a male, whether she had the right to be told that, in fact, the doctor was a transgender woman. Now, I don't know how readily a person could tell if a person is transgender. I mean, the transgender people that I've met have been pretty apparent to me. I can't claim any expertise on it. I felt that, I mean, as always, I tried to see both sides of the story, and I could see why this doctor would say, look, I'm here being a doctor, I'm being a professional. My identity shouldn't be the issue here. My identity should be just the fact that I'm here to do my job in a professional manner. But at the same time, you could feel for the patient who, if the patient realizes, hi Suffolk, if the patient realizes that this doctor is a transgender woman, that they could feel pretty traumatized, if they had been the victim of some form of trauma before that. And the point that I came to at the end of my conversation was that, like everything in life, you have to strike a balance. You got to find a balance. So you've got to protect everybody's rights, not just minorities' rights, but you've got to protect everybody's rights. And whilst you have to protect the rights of a transgender woman or man, it shouldn't be at the cost of the rights of an inverted commas normal person. And don't get triggered by the word normal. I said in inverted commas, normal person. Um, and I think there should be some form of proportion added, some common sense, to all these kind of equations. But you can't have these conversations these days without people shouting you down or misunderstanding you or misquoting you or accusing you of being prejudiced in some way. So that's probably the reason why I didn't upload it this morning. And one of the other considerations that I had was whether sexuality and gender are two separate things. And obviously, that I think has been brought into focus by the whole transgender and identity consideration debate. Yeah, labeling you a bigot, Chad, is would be quite tame, I think, if that was the worst of it. Alon Kawim Breyer, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. Hope you're well. I was I do some real estate work sometimes, and oftentimes when you see me driving into town, I'm sometimes visiting a piece of property, and we the one of the buildings that I go to on a fairly regular basis, one of the tenants there went through transitioned is the word I was looking for, transitioned during the course of the time in that property. They were there for about 3 years, something like that. And at one point, she was a he, but then she became a she. At one point, she sent me an email saying that from now on, I want you to call me by this and this name, and to refer to me in the female form. And she quotes all the various legislation and so on and so on. And from that point on, I respected her wishes, of course. Whenever I sent emails and communicated, it was always with her new name. But she had a massive chip on her shoulder. Every single opportunity that she had um, to feel triggered, she took. And I remember one time it was a discussion about something completely irrelevant. It was something to do with, I don't know, maybe something to do with the property. And she said something along the lines that it's because I'm transgender that you're taking the mickey or something like that. And I laid into her and I said, "What are you on about?" And I said to her, "From day one, when you asked me to respect your wishes and to refer to you as that, I have done that. I've been polite to you. I've respected you, and I've got absolutely no axe to grind with you. So why are you bringing that up?" And but she was a very, very troubled person. I often had to deal with her father because she was just not somebody that I could deal with. And the father once called me up and said that she's going through this crisis. You got any problems, call me. So that's what I did. And but definitely a troubled person. And you know, I don't want this to come across again as being prejudiced and labeling them all as this, that, or the other. But certainly, statistics do seem to bear out the fact that they're definitely troubled people. Whether it's they're troubled because of the prejudice that they feel, or they're troubled because of their identity crisis. But once they go through the transition and become women, um, it doesn't seem to help. For a lot of cases, it doesn't seem to help their situation. And the suicide rate, according to statistics, amongst transgender people is extremely, extremely high, which is very sad. Hey, Signalman, how you doing? Hi, Radcliffe. Yeah, Chad, I don't know. You see, I don't know why, whatever trouble and stress that somebody's going through, why it should lead to a change of gender. And that's what's curious to me, because clearly they're obviously not feeling happy being a man, or vice versa, whichever way around it is. But let's just say man to woman for now. It would be interesting to know what that statistic is actually, whether it's even roughly 50-50 man to woman, woman to man, or if it's more men going to women or more women going to men. I'd really be interested in knowing that. My cliched mind, if you like, my cliched, almost, if you want to say prejudiced mind, in inverted commas, would say that it's men moving over to women. But I'm curious to know what that statistic is. Tim, I would expect you to know the answer to that, Tim. You seem to be very up on the statistics these days. Hey, Reggie Fraser. Grobnob, that is the question, isn't it? That is the question. You know, if you watch a lot of the videos out there on YouTube, you'll hear both sides of the argument. You can watch somebody like Jordan Peterson, who will give you his opinion on it, or Ben Shapiro, and these kind of people, and then you could watch some of the people who are for transgenderism, who will explain to you exactly why transgenderism is a real thing. Yeah, apparently, Ratcliffe, that is the case. That the statistic that is quite often quoted is that the suicide rate is extremely high. It would be interesting, Tim, to know what that is. If you can have a quick look online, that would be cool. Hermaphrodites, that's a red herring. It's just a red herring. Then it's a totally different kettle of fish. But what interests me is why it comes out in their sexuality, because there's lots of people who have mental difficulties and neurosis, and quite correctly, somebody said before it was previously known as dysphoria. Um, Somehow or other, what used to be a condition, or something such as dysphoria, is now becoming a normality. And nowadays, you can't say things like it's not the normality, or it's not the norm. And uh, well, look, statistics tell you that it's not the norm. It doesn't mean that you can be prejudiced against them, but you can describe it for what it is. I don't think anybody should be prejudiced against, however small their minority is. And I used to use the phrase that they're statistically non-existent because of the minuscule number of transgender people there are in the world. But it doesn't mean that they can be prejudiced against. I'm all for that. I've used this example before. The amount of people, say, born without thumbs is going to be even less of a significance in the world, but it doesn't mean that you can be prejudiced against people without thumbs. It's just the fact that they are statistically insignificant. I know Sam online used to get very annoyed when I used that phrase, but I'm not saying it to be. I don't know what the answer is for them. I do feel for them, honestly. Um, but like with all minorities, the Jewish race included, my main argument with all of these groups is that they should all be allowed to do what they want within their own lives. Just don't force it on other people. That's my position. I think that's always been my position. If somebody's going through a psychological trauma, which I think that people who, in the end, resort to transgenderism, they obviously have an acute um, sense of need to make that transformation. I don't envy them that. I don't envy them the trauma that they go through leading up to that decision. And therefore, if somebody feels that they need to transgender and that will make them feel better, I don't have a problem with that. Or more, go for it. Absolutely. People have the right to feel well. People have the right to well-being. But I don't want it rammed down my throat. I'm not going to ram my Judaism down somebody's throat, and I don't want somebody else to ram their um, sexuality down my throat. Simple as that. Excuse the turn of phrase. That's my point, Chad. Equity. There will never be equity in reality. They want equity, but it's just not possible. The numbers just will never stack up. And I think that people need to call a spade, and people need to be prepared to say that transgenderism is not normal. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, not normal, but just that it is not the norm. Nevertheless, they should be able to do that, and they shouldn't be criticized for it, and they shouldn't be prejudiced against for it. But they should also understand that they are not the norm, not in the way they're treated, but in the way how it affects the rest of society. In other words, I shouldn't have to change my way of life because of somebody's transgenderism. So a good example is that doctor or the possible victim, the patient who might feel traumatized as a result of being examined by a transgender person. And the rights of the transgender person should definitely not trump the rights of the non-transgender person. That's my feeling on it. So if I'm reading that right, Tim, are you saying that the amount of male to female is roughly double the female to male? Is that what you're saying? I'm not sure what you mean there, Chad. If it was chromosomal, do you mean that these people have a different makeup in their chromosomes, which leads them to feel that they're in the wrong gender? Is that what that means? And then you're saying that that's just not the case across the population. Is that what you're saying? Well, that's really what I was saying, Chad, is I don't quite know what leads. Well, I don't know. 11% in Canada are transgender? That can't be right. Surely not, Chad. It doesn't make sense unless Canada is such a stressful place to live in, or for some reason people are feeling so out of sorts that they feel that they're in the wrong gender or the wrong body. I mean, I know that in Canada, certainly, that's where that's where Jordan Peterson got his fame through his being reprimanded by his university. 1.1 is also a very big number. Yeah, 11% I think is impossible because the economy would come to grind to a halt if it was 11%. You know, their version of national health or whatever it is they have there just wouldn't be able to cope with it. Hey, Sean. Yeah, I mean, Paul, that was an argument which we discussed one day about the push here in the UK for that kind of topic to be taught to little kids in school, which I'm personally very much against. And so one of the arguments was that the more you teach children about it, the more they're going to experiment with it. And essentially, you're going to make it a normality, and the percentages will keep on increasing. And other people said that that's a load of rubbish. You know, you're not going to be able to force people to become, you're not going to be able to indoctrinate people to become the opposite sex. It's either they feel it or they don't. I don't know. I'm not sure that that's true. I would even go so far as to say that it could be naturally occurring, that people feel out of sorts, and that but that's um, still something which is out of the ordinary. It's out of the norm. Clearly, man and woman were intended to be man and woman. I don't think anybody could argue with that. And you don't see anywhere else, besides for the odd fish here or there, which can be hermaphrodite, and which have both sets of reproductive organs. But generally speaking, throughout creation, it's not a phenomenon which prevails in any way, shape, or form. And essentially, if that increased to a very large scale, you end up wiping off humanity off the face of the earth. So, what would be the point in that? I mean, that's obviously in a very extreme position, but it kind of goes to whether that's normality or not. You know, if you're religious, then you believe procreation to be one of the fundamental purposes um, on this world, and if you're not religious, it's a fundamental um, innate instinct to procreate, and to reverse that process is reversing that process. It's perverting that process, again in inverted commas. I'm not saying that they're intending to be perverse as such, but it is deviating, let's put it that way, it's deviating from the normal process, the normal, essentially, the cogs of the world turn in one direction, and effectively you're reversing the cogs and you're winding it in a different direction. Procreation is one of the fundamental cogs of the world, um, and deviating from that is essentially putting a spanner in the works. That's, I think, a fair way to put it. It's not to say that some people have that need, but to create it, to give it equity, or to give it balance, or to give it status within the realms of normality, I think deviates from uh, the normal workings, machinations of the world. And in terms of homosexuality, homosexuality is mentioned in the Bible, so it's as old as the hills. I'm not sure of the connection there between collective unconsciousness and transgenderism. Do enlighten. It's interesting that you say that because there's lots of um, Jewish people around the world, or people of any religion, who are homosexual or transgender, but they still identify as their religions, as members of their religions, which is interesting. And that's something which I've always actually had trouble with religion in terms of levels of observance, is where you draw the line. And because there is no perfect person on this world, so even the greatest Talmudical scholar in the world is fallible. So therefore, as soon as the greatest Talmudical scholar in the world does commits one sin, is he therefore from now on non-Jew? No, obviously not. But I find it interesting is the levels. There's millions of levels in every type of level of observance. Me as an observant Jew, I consider myself an observant Jew, but I know that I don't observe Judaism 100%. And me compared to one of my neighbors, I would say that he's a much better Jew than I am. Whereas somebody around the corner from me, I would say that I was a better Jew than him. Not that I know what he's getting up to, but certainly from an external visual point of view, as much as one knows about anybody else, obviously. And I think that's probably a struggle. Good night, North Country. Thank you very much. I think that's a struggle that every person of religion has. And I suppose even people who are not religious, but just generally want to be good people. Um, it's I suppose it's the guilt complex that we all have. And I suppose what's to some extent what keeps us on the straight and narrow. Not a problem, Paul. As long as views are put across in a reasonable way, you can hold whatever view you like on my channel, but as long as it's done in a respectful way. Grobno, no, I don't have two fridges. I do have two sinks, and I do separate meat from dairy, yes. And to understand the difference, you got to really understand the religion a little bit. I don't think anybody's too particularly bothered about the flag, Tim and Paul. Yeah, absolutely, Chad. You know, we don't know, assuming you're religious, we don't know to what level each sin is considered in heaven. You know, and which sins are the most heinous. There are obviously some which are said quite specifically in the Bible, so you know that they're worse than others, but by the level of punishment that was given. There's one argument which I see. I've watched quite a lot of Hitchin. A discussion I would have loved to have seen is a discussion between Hitchin and Jordan Peterson. Um, the world is moving very, very fast. And depending on which religion you're in, I mean, certainly in our religion, we believe we're moving very close to the end of times, wherever that means, and possibly at year 6000, something along those lines. But we don't know the actual date. But about 150 years ago, one of the greatest rabbis, esoteric rabbis, something like 150 to 200 years ago, said that when it comes close to the end of times, it will be as hard to keep faith as climbing up a sheer faced wall without any, just with your bare hands. In other words, to just climb straight up with your bare hands, obviously on a sheer wall. Obviously, that's impossible. But he said at the time that that's what it would be like. Is to have faith would be as hard as that. And when that happens, when the world becomes so inconsistent and so crazy and so turned upside down that anything goes, and the whole concept of faith and religion and God is brought into question so overtly, and people of faith start to fall away from the faith as a result, then you know you're coming towards the end of times and the coming of the Messiah. That's something which was said, as I say, about 150 to 200 years ago. So if you're religious, I guess there's a silver lining in the cloud. Thank you, Bona. Bring it down to food. I'm okay with that. Nice piece of chocolate for me. Interesting. The job that I was at tonight, it was obviously a meaty meal, nice bit of steak, and obviously we don't mix meat and milk. It was a kosher affair, So they served something like a chocolate fondant at the end. But because we'd had a meaty meal, it couldn't be made with butter or anything like that. So it had to be made dairy free. And it was absolutely delicious. Usually, in most of the kosher affairs, weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever it might be, whatever is chocolate at the end is never really that good because it's not milky. It's completely dairy free. So either it's completely overloaded with margarine, which is disgusting, or it just doesn't have that nice, creamy, buttery, oozy kind of flavor. But tonight, I don't know how they did it, but it was delicious. I actually sent a picture of it to my wife. And I said to her, "This was the best chocolate pudding that I've had, which is dairy free." That may be Chad, but I think it was a collective statement, not about individuals. And he was basically, obviously, you understood what I was saying, but he was essentially saying that when the whole world feels like it's going in that direction, you can at least take solace in the fact that that's the situation, and that don't think that you're going mad, and don't think that if you're struggling with faith, you should realize that that's normal, and kind of in a counterintuitive way, it helps you to retain your faith, if that makes any sense. Hey, Jimmy. Fire and brimstone. 40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes. Grobnob, you're the voice of doom. Doom, I say. Yeah, I think we got the message, Grobnob. Well, actually, the dogs and cats and the wolf or the lion lying with the sheep is a prophecy for when the Messiah comes, that there will be no evil and violence in the world, which is one of the arguments against, that I've heard anyway, against uh, the belief that Jesus was the Messiah. And again, no offense to the Christians out there, um, but that was supposed to be the prophecy, which didn't happen really. The world didn't change. But anyway, I don't want to get into all of that. Hey Jordan, how you doing? Yeah, Boner, that's true, very true, and that certainly is one way of putting it. Can't disprove that really. Can't prove or disprove anything in faith because it's faith. Thank you very much, Jordan. I've tweaked it a third time today. I haven't done a video of that, but I'm kind of beginning to think that my second version was the best of all three. I'm not too sure yet. I might still tweak on it again. We'll see. I don't know if you caught a picture of it, of the third version. Do I read books regularly? I do. These days, I try to make it to be about pipes. But I don't usually have the patience for really heavy reading because it taxes my brain too much. If I've got to read a book, say a philosophical book, and I have to keep concentration for across a whole page to get somebody's point, most of the time I can't be doing with that. Right, that's my cigar done. That was a pretty good cigar. No, Jordan, I don't believe I have. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of non-Cuban cigars. I do have some that I like. I like the underworld, undercrown cigars. I like the underground, some of them. I like the Oliva Serie Milanios. I like the Padrons um, and some of the Perdomos. But generally speaking, I'm a Cuban cigar man. Oh dear me. Okay, people. I think that's enough for one night. I hope nobody took offense from anything that we discussed tonight. I enjoyed the chat. I hope you did. Thanks very much for joining. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Grobnob. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Paul, Bona, Cal Delta, Tim, Tree, Chad, Radcliffe, and everybody else. Algonquin Briar. Algonquin Briar. Thanks, PA Piper. Have a great night, everybody. Guantanameros. No. I have had them in my humidor, but I don't think I've ever smoked it. I'm too much of a snob. Night, Snoopy. Sorry I missed your name out. Have a great one, everybody. Good night.